This is Jose from Southern Life. I am issuing a travel warning to Florida for people coming here on spring break. Let's get into this. This is a real travel warning that I am giving you if you're coming to Florida, so you understand the reality that you're being lied to about the current condition of Florida. Banning spring break is part of Florida's culture war. I went on social media and I found the people who were spreading anti-spring break vocabulary, and they're also the same people that are pushing other right-wing agendas. Thus, the ban or the hate against spring breakers in Florida comes from a political ideology. In fact, we went on arrest records for many different counties during this time period, and you just cannot find young people from other states being arrested in Florida during this time period. So the notion doesn't even realistically exist in the state of Florida. Most of the time when there have been violent events at spring break, it is DUIs, people who are from Florida of an older demographic, and locals that live in Florida that get involved in gang shootings or other gang rivalry events. It isn't tourists. And this is absolutely analytically provable. All you have to do is log into your Florida county's arrest records and try, if you can, to find a young person of spring break age being arrested in your county. They do list their home state or their home cities. You're not going to find it. It doesn't analytically exist. The notion of spring breakers coming to Florida to cause problems isn't even analytically a thing. It is mostly people from Florida who cause havoc during spring break, but they're not the people that actually come here to vacation. And again, if you want to disbelieve me on that, all you have to do is log into your local county's arrest records and see if you can find a single person from out of state of that demographic of age being arrested in your county. I guarantee you it doesn't exist. It's not real. So let's be clear that I spend hours a week browsing through arrest records, and I have never seen a single person of a young demographic being arrested in Florida during spring break. It doesn't exist. So the first part of today's warning is just letting you know where this is actually coming from. The issue with spring break in Florida comes from one of Florida's many culture wars that the state is currently fighting. But I'm going to tell you the real reasons why you shouldn't come to Florida right now if you're a spring breaker, or if you do come, the things you need to watch out for, because Florida is upside down right now. Number one is the red tide. The real reason why you need to be careful visiting Florida in 2025 is the red tide. FWC and other agencies have been playing down how bad red tide is. In fact, FWC has even gone as far as saying there's no red tide present when things like these are washing up along the shores of Southwest Florida. The red tide is a direct result of human contamination. This uncontrolled algae bloom is being fed by runoff from golf courses, agriculture, spraying Roundup into canals to kill grass that grows on the edges, and dredging of the canals. There's a lot of misinformation about what's actually happening in Florida. Point number two that you need to watch out for is state-run media. Just like Venezuela, North Korea, and other regimes, the state of Florida is controlling media releases. These media releases tend to deceive the public about contamination in the state of Florida, and the laws that are taking effect in the state of Florida that are constantly changing are part of this agenda. It is an agenda to deceive the public about the real reasons why Florida's ecology is in bad condition, and to deceive people about why the state of Florida's tourism is actually failing. Part of the culture wars embarks and also covering up many of the state's recent failures, including its impacts on the ecology and other issues that the public is being misled about. Many times when we see police press runs about things like spring break, for example, it is coming again from a perspective of contaminated media, purposely trying to tell people something that fits more to a political ideology to the actual real facts that are affecting the state of Florida. The state-run media in Florida also means that there's a lot of individuals like sheriff's offices that constantly go on press conferences telling people information as if it was a factual thing, when in reality it is nothing more than their political ideology. In the case of spring break, law enforcement has said that they bring violence and crime to the area. Anytime you have an influx of people from somewhere else, you're going to have an increase in crime. These law enforcement agencies in Florida are trying to lower their crime analytics. Unfortunately, when an area has a lot of visitors, places like Miami Beach, Panama City Beach, these areas usually have higher crime rates because these areas have higher volumes of people. It's a natural thing that happens with every single tourist town. It's a problem that every tourist town in the United States has, from the towns in Florida to places like South Carolina. This is what happens in tourist destinations. However, the state of Florida, with its culture wars aiming at demonizing other states for high crime rates, wants to get rid of these tourist destinations like Miami Beach because these areas have higher crime rates and it makes the state look like a violent place. But in reality, this is the reality of any place throughout the whole world that has large volumes of tourists. These beach towns in Florida like Miami Beach have had crime analytics that are considerably above the national averages, and that's going to happen anywhere that you have large numbers of tourists. However, the state of Florida, with its culture war, wants to demonize other states and places, and that's why they're really going after these places where tourists congregate. They're willing to destroy the vacations of thousands of millions of people to make sure that their political agendas get priority in the state of Florida. Let me hop real quick back to the point about the red tide and the contamination. There's been a lot of misinformation and cover-ups on the part of the state to hide the ecological destruction that is taking place in Florida. The red tide causes physical ailments on people. People end up being hospitalized for respiratory issues.
1014. Read and 10. Respond on tap.
The fish that die in the red tide may go away, but the carcasses of the fish are still on the sands. Crap, and there's like another dead animal over here. Look at this. There's like a dead animal right here. Like a bird maybe? Absolutely stinks. This means that you can easily obtain an infection if you have an open wound, leading to an amputation and other health complications. The entire coastline of Florida's west coast at this point has been completely destroyed by the red tide. Law enforcement agencies in the state of Florida, like FWC for example, have been trying to cover up the severity of the red tide because they don't want people to be afraid of the contamination and destruction that has become the coast of Florida, which started to aggravate right around the time of the big oil spill that we had in the Gulf. From there forward, it's been a complete contamination disaster for the state of Florida that doesn't cease to stop. Continually, we see these flows of red tide, dead fish, and humans as well getting sick from the red tide and its effects on humans, which can be manifested in respiratory problems, breathing issues, irritation to the skin. Many people are even hospitalized. The red tide is a very serious health concern, and agencies in the state of Florida have been covering up the severity of the issue because they don't want people to know how bad red tide has gotten Florida. In doing so, they're exposing people to coming to Florida on vacation unaware of the dangers that this situation poses to human health, as well as the fact that it's just about to destroy your travel plans to the state. They don't want people to know how bad things have got with contamination in Florida. The red tide is only one of many symptoms of the contamination that we're seeing in the state of Florida. And it is here in these mangroves. These are protected natural habitats that we have homeless encampments like this. These homeless camps are completely inaccessible, hidden deep in the woods of Florida. You can see there's a bridge going that way. You guys can see we are in the swamps, in the mangroves. Look at all the flies and mosquitoes. They're literally living in the mangroves. It's forced the homeless deeper and deeper, and now they're at the point where the homeless are literally living in the mangroves. Now these are areas that are mostly inaccessible, very difficult to access areas, very dangerous conditions to live in. Not only have hurricanes brought much ecological destruction to Florida, but the vast number of homeless people living on Florida's waterways in areas like the Florida Keys and any mangrove swamp have meant that for the most part, the estuaries and backwaters of Florida have become a landfill for homeless garbage, a landfill and septic tank for the thousands of people living on abandoned vessels and homeless people hiding in the mangroves of Florida. What used to be pristine, protected mangroves along the coast of Florida today is a homeless camp where the homeless people are hiding from the Florida state's tyrannical views on homelessness. The homeless tyrannical laws that Florida has implemented has made many of the homeless people hide in the mangroves, which has turned our pristine waterways into an absolute landfill of homeless contamination. This footage that you are seeing here is from the Florida Keys. These are supposed to be protected, pristine mangrove swamps, and they are nothing but vast homeless camps. This is what's happening along the coast of Florida, and the state is very well aware that there's almost nothing left. The biomass of Florida is only a fraction of what it used to be, and we're talking about the vast majority of animals have just simply died. Only species like catfish and some species of shark that are tougher have survived. For the most part, the only thing left when there are red tide events at this point is catfish, mullet, and a few other hardy species. Most of the more sensible species, like the sea trout, have disappeared from most of Florida's coast as it's become uninhabitable from contamination. All these boats that you see here are used by the homeless people to go to their islands where they make makeshift camps. Trying to enter these places is too dangerous. I haven't done video in these places yet. Most of the time they're armed, and if you try to go in these places, you encounter very dangerous armed people. This is what the coast of Florida has become, and this is in the Florida Keys out of all places. The state of Florida continues to blame the demise of Florida's vibrant coastlines on spring breakers and the waves of crime that they bring along. But in reality, what's really destroyed the coast of Florida is the contamination and disregard for any type of environmental concerns, which has rendered the state of Florida practically a coastal landfill. Blaming the spring breakers is a scapegoat of the reality that Florida is facing. The contamination has practically made much of the coast of Southwest Florida into a post-apocalyptic scene of destruction and ecological damage. Do not believe for a minute that the problem that Florida is facing with tourism is anything to do with spring breakers bringing waves of violence. The real problem in Florida is that the contamination has got so bad, so much fish are dead, there's so many environmental issues along the coastline that people just simply don't come here anymore because they get sick when they visit Florida. Point number 3, racial and political violence. A lot of people are afraid to come to Florida because of the tense political and racial environment that the state is in right now. This footage right here is a St. John's police officer who bothered a Guatemalan. Now, this individual was not here illegally. He was on vacation. All his papers were in order. He was outside of his hotel talking to his mother on the phone. Nobody made a police report. Nobody called. The police officer saw him and decided to harass the person who was doing nothing wrong. The police officer went ahead to tackle the person. Again, this is an individual who was vacationing in Florida from Guatemala. He wasn't working illegally. He had all the right to be here. The police officer eventually had a heart attack. The St. John's Police Department went ahead and charged him with manslaughter of a police officer. Eventually, the charges had to be dropped, and the reason the man had his angry fit of anger was a personal reason unrelated to the person who broke no law. There was no reason for police contact. This is what law enforcement in Florida does. They go out there and harass people because police profiling is a huge issue in Florida. The international tourism in Florida has declined dramatically. People used to come here from Brazil, Mexico, Spain, Latin America, and all of Europe. People have reported that while visiting Florida on vacation, both law enforcement and individuals attack them for not speaking English. People on vacation don't need to learn your country's language. They're not moving here. They're simply here on vacation. These racist attacks and racial tensions in Florida means that people have stopped coming to the United States to vacation, and particularly the state of Florida. Just in the last few years in the Bradenton and Sarasota area, I have seen with my own eyes on 3 occasions people that were vacationing in Florida from another country being told that they need to learn English or that they're in America, that they need to speak English. I talked to the individuals and they were on vacation from Spain with their family, and they told me that they'll never come back to this country because they came here to spend tourist dollars and they were treated like immigrants, like illegals trying to invade their country when all they were doing was visiting destinations like Siesta Key that they were told were among the best in the world. 700,000 Mexicans, 1 million Brazilians used to come to Florida every year. Those numbers have declined dramatically. 3 to 5 million Canadians come to Florida every single year. For the most part, they have stopped coming to vacation in Florida. I was just on Siesta Key a few days ago, and there are Americans literally in a brawl with Canadians. Racial tensions are high. You may have heard about the incident in Miami Beach a few weeks ago where a guy saw some people, he thought they were Palestinians, and shot them indiscriminately and random, and they weren't even Palestinians, they were Israelites. So the issue with racial tensions are very high in the state of Florida, and people are simply afraid to come here to be in the middle of a racial brawl. Imagine you come to a beach in Florida with your family and some stupid person comes and harasses you, calls you an invader to their country, and a whole brawl breaks out simply because somebody wants to harass you while you're bothering nobody, minding your own business. And these racial tensions do not just target minorities. Now we're starting to see Canadians being attacked by people as well. Also Northerners. There's starting to be a lot of anti-Northern sentiment where people who are Northerners are being told to leave Florida or go back home Yankee and stuff like that. That's become a huge problem as well. Basically, they have the ideology that only they can enjoy Florida, even though Florida has been forever a travel and vacationing destination. You have individuals who think that they own the entire state of Florida, and people are sick and tired of dealing with those people. They're afraid to come here, and many times that sentiment even spreads into law enforcement. So the racial tensions that we're seeing in Florida are well documented. You had the incident in Miami Beach where the guy thought the people were Palestinians and shot them. This isn't some make-believe woke liberal crap. This is real things that are happening to people when they come to Florida, and they're getting sick and tired of it. So the racial tensions and political violence in the state of Florida is definitely keeping people away from here. They're actually afraid to come here. Number 4 is gang violence. Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa to be particular, you can't have a large event without somebody getting shot. These events are labeled by, again, the state-run media as mass events, but in reality, they are gang violence. In particular, Jacksonville and the city of Tampa. Take Tampa, for example. Ybor City shooting was labeled as a mass event, and it was a gang rivalry between two particular groups, one from town and country. The issue in Tampa downtown, there's been 2 other shootings that were labeled as mass events or random, and they were not. They were gang-related shootings, so people go on social media and clearly identify what groups they belong to and what their intended targets were. So it isn't a lie, it isn't a surprise. These people even go on social media and talk about what these events were. So the state-run media continues to label these events as mass, but in reality, they are gang-related shootings. If you are in Jacksonville, Tampa, or Orlando, and there are large groups, if the wrong people meet, it becomes a shootout. People are afraid of large crowds in Florida, and in the case of Tampa, people have just altogether stopped going in the nightlife crowds because they know half the time it ends up being a shooting. Just in the last 24 hours, there was a gang shooting with motorcycle gangs in New Smyrna Beach over in Volusia County. What's interesting is that the Volusia County Sheriff has been the premier anti-spring break person in Florida, detesting people, warning them, and even threatening people that come to his county as spring breakers, telling them that they're going to get arrested. However, Bike Week, aka Crime Week, they don't go after that because the demographic of the people that come to Bike Week is the same demographic that they want in Florida, an older white crowd. So despite the fact that Bike Week is actually the event that leads to the most shooting, the most drugs, the most crime, in fact, people don't call it Bike Week in Florida, they call it Crime Week. They don't go after that event because that's the demographic that they want. Again, playing favorites with their culture wars. And in reality, while the state of Florida claims that crime is over here, it's really over there. In the case of Florida, well, these events like Bike Week, aka Crime Week, have just become events that people are afraid to go to. And even events that are not supposed to be scary, people just don't want to be in large crowds in Florida because of all the gang violence. And if you're saying that I'm lying, we just had an event less than 24 hours ago proving my point. Point number 5 is profile-based policing. This news report out of Lee County, Florida, a police officer was arrested for targeting Hispanics to extort them. That's right. He would pull over Hispanic people and then demand money because they were allegedly illegal. This happened in Lee County, Florida, and police-based profiling is a huge problem. Laws like SB 1718 have gone after Hispanics They are also going after the homeless, and they're going after the spring breakers. In the state of Florida, policing is based on profiling, and what law enforcement does is it creates a profile of who they want to go after, may it be spring breakers, homeless people, or immigrants. As of right now, all law enforcement agencies have the ability to act as immigration officers in Florida, even though they have practically no training in how to do so. Law enforcement decides who they want to arrest, and that's not the way crime works. Crime is based on who's breaking the law, not who law enforcement wants to target. Just in Collier County, Florida, this week, there was a day where 70% of the people arrested were of Hispanic origin, even though Hispanics make up about 20% of that county's population. I went through arrest records in Florida counties during the spring break time to see if young people from other places were being arrested for breaking the law in Florida. And quite frankly, that's not the case. Not even along the Florida panhandle, where it's more violent and they have more tourists from adjacent states. Even there, people being arrested from other states in Florida are a minority. And the overwhelming majority of people that are being arrested in Florida that have an out-of-state address are individuals from state like New York that are in their 50s being arrested for DUI. So basically, once again, the demographic that they're harboring and protecting is the one that's actually committing the crimes, and the demographic they're going after, young people from other states enjoying spring break, are almost impossible to find if you browse through Florida arrest records. So it's again the ideology of blaming somebody for a crime wave when in reality the crime wave is somebody else. And it isn't a secret that in the springtime crime rises throughout the United States. The warmer the weather is, the more crime you have, but they want to correlate that with the spring breakers, even though if you go through arrest records, you're going to have a very hard time finding a young person with an out-of-state address getting arrested in Florida. It almost doesn't even exist. So it's a completely bogus notion. It isn't even something you could prove analytically by arrest records, but it's the notion that they want to spill out. When it comes to police profiling, the people that are actually getting arrested in Florida, people don't want to have part of that. They want to come here to vacation, not to be part of your political culture wars. Point number 6 is something called a rideshare racket. These are individuals who open up accounts on rideshare applications like Uber or Lyft, and then they rent them to people who are in the country illegally for a weekly fee. In the Tampa Bay area, that's about $125 a week. So somebody mostly Dominican or Haitian background, sometimes Cubans who are here undocumented, will end up renting an Uber account from a legitimate account holder for $125 a week. This creates a situation where drive-share riders simply have to compete excessively for rides, since these people have to come up with a weekly quota to pay off their leased account before they can make a profit. With 2 leased Uber accounts, individuals can make as much as $1,200 a month with these rideshare rackets, and it leads to a situation where undocumented people are driving around Florida giving people Uber rides. Many times these people do not know how to drive and they get into accidents. I have run into people in Florida who got into an accident with an Uber driver, and when the cops show up, the person doesn't have a driver's license, doesn't have insurance, which means that the person being hurt doesn't have the ability to be compensated for their damages. I recently ran into somebody on Uber who was on vacation from another country, and they ended up with an Uber driver getting into an accident. The guy had no papers, no documents, was on one of these Uber accounts that are leased, ended up getting hurt in an accident and received no compensation. So on one of the mounting problems that you see here in Florida are these rideshare rackets that law enforcement does nothing about. Seems like a mounting list of problems that you're going to face when you come to the state of Florida. To protect yourself from these rideshare rackets, you want to make sure that your Uber driver has a vehicle that is the exact match of what it is supposed to be. Many times the vehicle will be a different model or year, or the color may not be exactly the same. You want to make sure it's exactly the vehicle that you're supposed to be in, since many times the vehicles kind of all mimic each other, and this is part of the racket. It's like, oh, it's supposed to be a gray, but it's a dark gray, whatever. Make sure that the vehicle you're getting into is the exact vehicle you should have been getting into. Number 7 is tourist-based economic crimes. There are people that purposely target tourists to victimize them with many crimes. One of the most popular is renting properties that have mold, that have been flooded to people who are unaware of the dangers that this can cause to human health. As you know, a lot of substances are illegal in Florida, and there are hustlers that can get you substances in Florida that are prohibited. Many times these substances are tainted. They're not what they're supposed to be, and many people end up having overdoses trying to obtain illegal substances in Florida that in their home state they can find easily and accessibly and are safer. But here in Florida, they are tainted, meaning that people that come here to party end up finding out they end up overdosing. Many times these individuals specifically target tourists and tourist areas because they know they're people that aren't from here, and they feel like these people are more vulnerable and they don't have to worry about repercussions from the law. So if you find yourself walking through a downtown in Florida and somebody approaches you and offers you something, chances are that is definitely not the way you obtain anything in the state of Florida. That is how people end up overdosing. Pickpocketing and petty theft has become a huge problem in Florida as well, and many people are finding that they are getting scammed or robbed out of their personal belongings. I just yesterday had an Uber passenger who thought she lost her purse. She kept looking for it where she left it. I felt really bad having to tell her that most likely somebody swiped it from underneath her. So there are a lot of individuals who go to tourist areas looking for people that are vulnerable. Many times when people are on vacation, they leave their keys in the sand. You also have individuals who come and they place their items over your items, and eventually your stuff disappears and their stuff. They get your room keys and they go upstairs and get your car keys. If there is even a way to get to your room, they go in your room and take your stuff from your room. All that while you're swimming in the beach, thinking that your items are secure on the beach. Theft along the beaches has become a huge problem. You have to be careful if you're on the beach, how you're going to store your personal possessions, where you're going to store them, because a lot of people are now targeting people on the beaches to steal their personal possessions. I was recently in St. Petersburg Beach, and this same exact thing happened to me. I had placed my possessions somewhere. A large group of people came with a lot of stuff, placed it right over my stuff, and my stuff disappeared underneath their stuff. But the reality is that there's 1,000 different ways that tourists are being targeted for crime, both on an economic level and on a street crime level, so you need to be careful. There are people targeting you. Number 8 is just general lawlessness. Crime has increased dramatically in Florida. If you find yourself walking outside of your hotel, you may see that there's people living in the woods just about everywhere. They particularly like to live near hotels because they can do smash and grabs. If you're going to be staying in cities like Jacksonville or really just anywhere in Florida, you want to make sure that you leave absolutely nothing in your vehicle, particularly visible. These individuals hide out in the woods near your hotel and at night come and do smash and grabs and vehicle break-ins. Law enforcement never seems to find these places. If you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, you have seen all the videos I've done showing you guys these burglary base camps where there's nothing but purses, wallets, and suitcases everywhere from all the licks that they hit on tourists at hotels and resorts. So this is a huge problem in Florida, that crime in general has increased dramatically. And of course, law enforcement always says, we don't know what happened, there's nothing we can do. You need to be very careful if you're staying in a hotel in the Jacksonville area. Make sure that you look on Google Maps and make sure you read through the reviews that nobody has reported vehicle break-ins. Good luck finding a hotel that doesn't have a report of vehicle break-in, but even if you do, make sure that that hotel doesn't have a lot of wooded areas nearby. Many times you can see these camps on Google Maps. These are called burglary base camps. So crime in general has increased a lot in Florida, and if you're coming here, you're going to have to be a lot more careful than in the past. If you are coming to Florida, make sure that you catch an Uber from point A to point B, or don't travel late at night, because just about every single wooded acre in Florida is now a homeless camp where people are desperately in these places and situations. Walking late at night past these areas can be problems, and many times these areas are close to tourist plots because that's where they hit their licks. DUIs and hit and runs are rampant in Florida. Pedestrians are getting hit almost every single day. In fact, in Sarasota and Bradenton, almost on a daily basis. You're seeing people arrested for hit and runs, and DUIs, particularly at night during the weekends, are rampant in Florida. Most of the time, if somebody's drinking and driving and they hit you, they're going to flee. So you need to be very, very careful walking around late at night, because many people are inebriated behind the wheel. And if you get hit by them, they're going to show no accountability and run away. Just here in Sarasota, recently we had a 72-year-old woman who hit a mother with 2 kids. Both kids were lost. One was 5 months old. The other one was 2 years old, I believe, and the mother was left in critical condition. The person ran away, a community effort. They found the person, 72-year-old woman, who is now being charged with a 2 count of leaving the scene of an accident causing death. This is a huge problem in Florida, so if you're a pedestrian and you're drinking, the drivers on the road may be drunk as well. You could easily be hit by a drunk driver. This is a huge problem in Florida, and like I said, most of the time they're going to run on you. A lot of people come here with dreams of a vacation and end up in a wheelchair, hurt, with the person that hurt them fleeing, leaving you stuck behind with a lifetime of misery and pain caused by somebody who was negligent. And the vast majority of the time, the people that are doing this hit and run and DUI scenarios are the wealthy white elite behind gated communities that are protected by law enforcement in Florida, so they're not very proactive about targeting these people. Law enforcement in Florida is more interested in catching the person who is changing the bed sheets in your hotel than they are in catching the person who runs you over and leaves you in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. So keep in mind while vacationing in Florida that general lawlessness is out of control. The people that I deal with on Uber can't believe how many homeless, vagrants, and just crazy nuts we have here in Florida. Many people that I get on Uber tell me their experiences about being randomly attacked by strangers who are intoxicated, high, or just mentally ill. So the state of Florida doesn't really provide a lot of services to people like that. So they're just rampantly out on the streets causing havoc. And this is not me telling you. This is the passengers that I deal with that are constantly telling me about all the crazy things they see in Florida. They can't believe how many homeless, vagrants, and crazy people we have. So this is definitely a problem that when people come to Florida, they notice how general lawlessness is a huge problem here. Many people also notice how even though it's illegal in Florida, people consume it openly. A lot of people are kind of shocked by that. They don't see that in their home state. So again, general lawlessness is a huge problem that you need to look out for in Florida. Now let's be clear, Florida's not a dangerous state like Mississippi and Louisiana, but Florida is a lawless state. For example, Florida has more homelessness than Alabama. Florida has higher overdose death rates than California. So it doesn't have violence more than other states, but it does have more general lawlessness. In particular, it's illegal to smoke in Florida like that. So anybody doing it is doing it lawlessly for the most part. Number 9 is a court monopoly. On behalf of the tourist industry, let's suppose you were to get hurt in the state of Florida during your vacation. For example, a year and a half ago, I was here in Panama City Beach, and I got hurt at a resort because of the resort's negligence. They were extraordinarily negligent. Do you think that's a lawsuit? No, it's not. Not in the state of Florida. Particularly in Bay County, Florida, these areas are under a monopoly. The lawyers, the one you're going to hire, is already working for the tourist industry if you didn't know that. So if you think you're going to find a lawyer in Florida that's going to defend you against the tourist industry, those lawyers are already working for the tourist industry. In particular, if you get hurt in Florida at a tourist destination like a resort, there's very little chance that you're going to be able to sue them. And I'm not saying you're going to go to Florida and you're going to try to get hurt and get a lawsuit. That's not what I'm saying. I didn't expect to get hurt at this hotel. I was left in a wheelchair for 6 months, walker and cane, and I'm still suffering every single day from pain. And I wasn't able to get a lawful compensation for the clear and obvious neglect at the resort where I was hurt. The reason being is that in Florida, the courts and the lawyers are all in conjunction with the tourist industry. So if you are coming to Florida and you get hurt by the negligence of somebody in these industries, and let me tell you, negligence is a huge problem at these resorts because, again, they do not pay their workers very much. They're extremely untrained. A lot of times people in Florida fight for these jobs. It means that the people that are being hired are not the people that have the best credentials, but the people that have the best contacts. In the unfortunate event that you come to vacation in Florida, you have practically no chance of winning a legal battle. The lawyers, the big industries are already connected, and they're going to make sure that you can't sue them. In the rare case you do sue them and you do take them to trial, keep in mind that along the coast of Florida is 80 to 90% Republican voters, mostly older people who have very little sympathy for tourists or people from other places, which means that if you do go all the way there with a jury, it's very difficult for those people not to feel more sympathetic for the tourist industries than they are for you as a vacationer in Florida, which means that for the most part, these industries understand that they don't have to worry too much about liability because they know that the odds are already heavily in their favor. This has led to a situation where tourists in Florida are finding quite dangerous situations. If you travel to states like California and New York, you don't encounter these problems. There's states that make sure that everything is safe, up to date, and there's a lot of requirements and regulations. But in the state of Florida, there are zero barriers. If one of these industries is neglectful and they hurt you, even if your case is clear as day, even if your case is on video, that doesn't mean that it's going to stand a chance in Collier County, Florida, in Bay County, Florida. These are counties where even if you do have clear evidence, that doesn't mean you're going to get any type of judgment in your favor. So you need to be very careful while vacationing in Florida, because if something completely unplanned were to happen to you, the odds are heavily stacked against you in the court system. And it is because, for the most part, these big industries are in conjunction with the lawyers to make sure that nobody can sue them. So the whole system is rigged up to protect the industries of tourism in Florida. And we can get deeper into that subject, but I don't want to do that on today's video. It's a topic that kind of disgusts me to a large degree. But just know that if you vacation in Florida and something unfortunate happens to you, don't put your hopes up that you're going to be compensated. These industries are completely negligent, and they know they got the whole system rigged up. In my case, my lawyers told me that my case was clear as water. The problem is that in Bay County, Florida, you stand no chances of winning, period. And number 10 is kind of what I talked about a little bit at the start of the video, which is the state's culture wars. And the state's culture wars play into the red tide, it plays into the police profiling, it plays into, of course, the tourist industry having their full grip on the court system. All these things work in conjunction. And I just want you guys to know that this whole thing against spring breakers is nothing more than another culture war from Florida. I looked through arrest records very carefully, and it doesn't seem like there's a spike in people from other states of a young demographic getting arrested during these times of year in Florida. In fact, most people being arrested in Florida of an out-of-state status are individuals from New York in about the 50s and 60s age range for DUIs. Those are definitely not spring breakers. So it isn't an analytical thing that you could prove. It is just another one of Florida's culture wars. And the reason they really don't want young people in Florida, period. And this is kind of a sad reality for a lot of cities. For example, my hometown, Naples, Florida, it's been like 3 years since Hurricane Ian, and they still haven't put the Naples Pier back up, and they're not going to. The Naples Pier, the iconic symbol of the city, they never restored it after Hurricane Ian because they don't want tourists to go there. The rich people in Naples said, keep the pier closed, that way we don't have to have tourists visiting our city. And this is the sad reality of Florida, that the vast majority of these problems stem from nothing more than a culture war. But I want you guys to identify and be clearly aware that the reason why they're going after spring breakers in Florida, which helps people like me that live in the state, it brings tourism, it helps people who work in hospitality, transportation. A lot of the poor people in Florida depend on spring breakers. They're absolutely welcome here. But again, it's just another one of Florida's culture wars, and this one in particular, they're masking it up with the idea that crime happens at these events. But if you look through arrest records, you can't really analytically prove that. All right, guys, so if you do decide to come to Florida, which I hope you do decide to come here, I want young people to come to Florida and enjoy our beaches and have a good time here. I want to see you here. I want you to enjoy Florida. But if you do come here, these are 10 things you need to be aware of. That is the reality of what's happening in the state of Florida. So let's recap real quick the 10 things you're going to look out for if you do decide to come to Florida. State-controlled media telling you lies about what's really happening in the state. A lot of contamination and red tide. Be very careful, particularly if you're asthmatic. Racial and political violence throughout the entirety of the state. Gang shootings at large events. Police-based profiling. They're looking for particular people to arrest. Make sure that your Uber or rideshare driver actually is the person they're supposed to be. Tourist-aimed economic crimes. General lawlessness. Make sure you don't get hit by a drunk driver. The courts, monopolies. Hopefully you never get hurt while visiting Florida. But if you do get hurt, just understand that's how that system works. And of course, sadly, the state's culture wars, which is the reason why we're in this situation to begin with.